Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jim Dean, Dean of UNC Kenan-Flagler Business School, and it's my privilege to welcome you to the first Dean Speaker event of this school year. The Dean Speaker Series was created to bring to our campus outstanding scholars and leaders from the field of business, education, and government to share insights with the UNC Kenan-Flagler faculty, staff, the university, and the community at large. The Dean Speaker Series is made possible through support of the Archie K. Davis Endowment and is managed primarily by our students who select and invite the leaders from whom they are most interested in learning. Tonight we welcome Robert Moritz of PricewaterhouseCoopers. And I also want to welcome and acknowledge all of the PwC employees who have joined us this evening, particularly all of the UNC Kenan-Flagler and UNC grads who are at PwC. So if you're a UNC alum and a PwC employee, please stand so we can recognize you. So Bob, a lot of these people are both your people and our people.
Absolutely.
We're very pleased this evening to have Bob Moritz join us. Bob is chairman and senior partner of the U.S. firm of PricewaterhouseCoopers, LLP. PwC is a global professional services firm and is the second largest professional services firm in the world, with offices in 757 cities across 151 countries, which is most of the countries that there are, basically. Part of the Big Four, PwC employs 163,000 people and posted revenues of $26 billion in 2009. I'm confident those are audited figures. And over the years, PwC has been very supportive of our MAC program, and we greatly value our relationship with your organization, greatly value. Prior to Bob's current role, he served as the assurance leader of the U.S. firm of PwC from 2006 to 2009. From 2004 to 2006, he was the managing partner of the New York office and Metro region. Bob joined the firm in 1985, and during his time at PwC, served a 3-year tour in Tokyo, providing audit and advisory services to numerous European and U.S.-based financial services organizations operating in Japan. Following tonight's speech, John Hand, who is the H. Allen Andrew Distinguished Professor and Associate Dean of the Masters of Accounting program here at UNC Kenan-Flagler, will offer a vote of thanks on behalf of the faculty, staff, and students. I should mention that Bob graduated from SUNY Oswego and is certified by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, the New York State Society of CPAs, and the New Jersey State Society of CPAs. Please join me in welcoming to UNC Kenan-Flagler, Bob Moritz.
First off, thanks to Jim as well as to Betty for having me here today. And most importantly, thanks for the invitation to speak in this wonderful series at this wonderful institution. What I thought I would do today is talk about 3 different things, all interrelated. Current forces of change, how organizations have dealt with the current forces of change, some successfully, some not, and what some of those forces of change mean to you as an individual. And as I think about the focus of that kind of conversation, you can ask yourself the question, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Some may say true, some may say false. I would argue both. Let's talk about one of those constants. I met today earlier with a number of people that have interviewed with our firm and have internships or are in the process of interviewing. And it's clear when you think about the shoes I've traveled with, that the many experiences all of you are going through are the same one that many of the people that Jim acknowledged that are with PwC today have gone through themselves. In order to be successful, in order to be all that they have been thus far and yet to come, quality education has been the backbone and foundation and the starting point for their success, personally and professionally. That's a constant that will never change. I think, however, we've got to actually look to what in fact has changed, because there is a tremendous amount that has changed. And when you think through the changes that organizations have gone through, there's a series of forces challenges, opportunities, call them what you want, that at the end of the day drive organizational behavior, personal behavior, and the like. And when you think about the future, I go back to Albert Einstein's quote, which is all around, I never think about the future, rather it comes to me soon enough, and I have to deal with it. That's the reality of the environment that we're all grappling with right now. And as a result of thinking about those forces, that first series of topics that I wanted to cover with you, I want to cover 4 very specific areas. They are the great rebalancing, new dimensions of talent, risk management to resiliency, and the concepts around trusting as well as verifying. And I'm going to start with this concept of the great rebalancing. You've all heard the word globalization. Seems pretty general. Can be applied to anything you want at any moment in time. People tend to use that word as it suits them. And often you hear it with terms like emerging markets, developing markets, BRICS, and the like. It's vague enough in terms of the term of globalization that I can't convey exactly what we mean. One could argue it implies that the so-called developed countries, those found in OECD, are engaging with the smaller, less developed countries, almost as if it was a favor or an opportunity, or more importantly, a one-sided opportunity. I will tell you that implication on the surface and below it is outdated and just outright wrong. China is a great example. China thinks of itself as a developed country, not an emerging country. It's not a BRIC. Brazil would say the same. Both nations arguably have fully recovered. Others could argue never went into the Great Recession. While the US, parts of Europe, are still struggling with low growth, unemployment, and clear challenges ahead. So I personally try not to use this term globalization. I believe it's a more accurate term to think about the concept of rebalancing. How long this rebalancing takes, I don't know. Could be several years, could be decades. And the concept of rebalancing is global, as well as in each of those territories that are developed, as well as emerging. But the rebalancing, nonetheless, is clear. The evidence is out there. We're seeing it as nations change positions on a global scale. Think about China, for example, just recently passed Japan as the second leading economy in the world. While the US economy remains the largest by far, the demographics of countries like China, India, Brazil, Indonesia, Russia, and the like will all change that mix again and again and again. No longer will the US economy be the main driver of economic growth. If you listen to Treasury Secretary Geithner recently, speaking at the IMF, he said, for the economy to be sustainable, the global economy, there needs to be a change in the pattern of global growth. For too long, many countries oriented their economies towards producing export, rather than focusing on consumption as well as export, counting on the US to import many of their goods and services they bought from us. Take South Korea as an example. Its growth, well-being have all been dependent on exports. So much so that 40% of its GDP is dominated by those exporting organizations. The US, on the other hand, world's largest importer. No surprise when you think about the consumer-led growth and consumption that we've had over many decades. We consume not only what we make, but also as much as others make as well. And we are, in fact, South Korea's biggest customer. There's a shifting, though, in the trade. In my recent visits to Korea, about 6 months ago, you see time and time again Korean organizations focusing on not only internal consumption, but the bilateral connections that they are making around the world, primarily around the rest of Asia, to think about their exporting, where their consumers are, where the ultimate customer may be. And you're seeing it such that the change is right in front of us. What's happening in Korea is a small example of what's happening around the rest of the world. China is another great example of the trend. You know it, you read it, you see it on the newspaper, you see it in the CNN articles or online when checking the internet. The U.S. has been a major consumer of Chinese goods, and the surplus dollars that have accumulated have benefited China greatly. As a result, they're able to invest in the U.S. debt and other mechanisms of what's happening on a global scale. While this will eventually mean that the U.S. should and has to begin exporting goods and services to China to pay back some of that debt, it also means that the U.S. economy needs to undergo its own rebalancing. A rebalancing in the U.S. that some could argue has already started in terms of somewhat less consumption, more exports, more savings and the like to deal with the economic challenges that we had ahead of us. At the same time, China is searching for ways to boost domestic consumption. They need to when you think about the demographics of the people that are in that great country. You have to think about what the Chinese are also doing, not only interacting with South Korea, but also some of the bilateral organizational trades agreements that they're pulling together right now with Brazil, Africa, and other nations. Again, rebalancing the world order in a way that we've never seen before and has never seen moving with such speed. As you can see, there's great amount of evidence around a rebalancing, and you're wondering to yourself, what has this got to do with this concept of leadership generally? Well, it has a lot to do with it. Some may think of CEOs in the business community as people who sit in large offices surrounded by a hierarchy of aides, whose job is to do whatever that boss may say. Such leaders, if in fact they do operate that way, are isolated from their company, their operations, and the reality of what's happening around them. They appear to their staff sometimes, as well as others, as if they were viewed through a telescope, larger than life, but distant and far away. But I can assure you that picture, that concept, is going away, and in fact has gone away in the companies that are successful and needs to go away in the companies that will ultimately survive. Because if we don't have change, they won't be here much longer. Leaders today cannot isolate themselves when they're running their businesses. A.G. Lafley, who was the previous CEO of Procter & Gamble, said his job is to be out in the market, talking to every stakeholder possible. Somebody who basically does data analysis, data processing, and ultimately comes back inside the organization to lead effective change, to serve the stakeholders that he's just interacted with. A job that the CEO must take seriously in order to remain relevant and lead from the front their respective organizations. Again, the first concept of leadership is setting a vision and having the skill sets necessary to have others follow and make that change come to life. Today, that requires interacting with many different people, organizations, or otherwise, and bringing interpersonal skills to convince them that they should act differently after that conversation, that action, initiative, program, or otherwise. And today's leaders should no longer be viewed through that telescope, but rather perhaps by analogy to a kaleidoscope. Some of you might understand the concept of a kaleidoscope. When you looked at it, you saw beautiful colors, displayed time and time again, each different every time you looked, bringing complex patterns, visual techniques, and the like to the picture. But all you had to do was shake it slightly or look at it from a different angle to see a different picture. Today's business leaders face exactly those issues and challenges just like that kaleidoscope. Their challenges and everything they face are complex, multifaceted, seldom clear, although all the time fascinating if brought and thought about in the right lens. They deal with colleagues, clients, stakeholders, and the like, representing diverse ethical as well as different backgrounds via different nations, cultures, and perspectives that are brought to bear. And whatever equilibrium they're trying to create in their organizations, with their teams, with their stakeholders, they're easily disrupted by a gentle shake, just like that kaleidoscope. Leaders today cannot afford to be personally remote, nationwide provincial, or disconnected from all stakeholders that can potentially bring that shake to the kaleidoscope. They cannot assume that the way they do business in the States will be the same the way it's done in the Middle East, Asia, or for that matter, in the US, looking ahead for many decades to come. The only way to deal with such complexity is to be in the middle of it, as AJ said, be in the eye of the storm. The decisions that need to be made, proven by the last 2 to 3 years, need to actually move forward with the speed of light and can't wait for research and data and analysis or paralysis by analysis. If you do that, you'll fail. The business leaders still need the skill sets that are brought by MBAs and fine institutions like this, but also need skill sets that are far more vast in themselves as a leader, in their teams around them, and with their employees in their organization. They must learn how to work across the spectrum of that entire organization to be successful and bring together an element of not just their IQ, but their EQ and their CQ, their emotional quotient in being able to lead, and their cultural quotient in understanding the world dynamics at large. Which gets to the second force of change, the new dimensions of talent. You all know how companies struggle to think about capital, how to raise it, how to deploy it, how to maximize it. The same is true for human capital. The competition for talent, both locally and globally, is fiercer than it ever has been before, even with an economy where people argue jobs are scarce and no one's moving. It used to be enough to get a job and be good at what you did. Good salesperson, programmer, accountant, whatever the case may be. The reality is the talent pool today has got to be focused on that's jacks or better to be in the game. It's much more in terms of expectations that people should have of themselves and the organizations that you want to be associated with have of you. It gets you into the game, but it won't necessarily keep you there. And the same is true for leaders and leadership. I go back to a quote from John F. Kennedy. Leadership and learning are indispensable to one another. That leader, that CEO sitting up there in that office, maybe viewed by the telescope, is one that never should stop learning. Each and every day, each and every opportunity. What successful leaders do and have done is more addition in terms of demonstrating the skill sets and adding to their own repertoire in terms of how to deal with the complex stakeholders and challenges in front of them. It includes interacting with governments, sovereign wealth funds, new stakeholders, NGOs, and the like. The very concept of human interaction has been enlarged, and in fact enlarged more so by the use of technology. Think about cloud computing, social media, and the like. Another connection point for communication with every single one of those stakeholders, and tools and techniques that leaders around the world, private, corporate, public, whatever it may be, need to understand, leverage, and maximize their usage in order to connect all of the various parts that they need to be dealing with going forward. And they need to do it themselves. They need to lead from the front. You can't outsource this to the HR team that you have underneath you. That remoteness, that disconnect will cause many to fail. Successful leaders must empathize with people, understand the perspectives that are different from their own. They have to build networks with those outside the organization as well as in, and make sure that they play the role of mentor, connector, diplomat, leader, all at the same time. Maybe sometimes emphasizing one more than the other, but nonetheless, all skill sets are in fact needed. Future leaders also need to challenge themselves, their own opinions, and need to be quick to self-correct. If you want to be smart and survive, you've got to be able to act in an instant whatever new things are getting thrown your way. You've got to challenge the status quo because anything done in the past might not play out in the future. If you think about PwC for a second, 163,000 people around the world, as Jim talked about. The challenges we face include seeking out a new traditional talent pool, one that's global, one that traditionally perhaps doesn't have our traditional skill set that we looked for in the past. And it's not just accounting and tax that we're looking for. There's a whole series of skill sets looking ahead, both, again, that bring that IQ, that EQ, and that CQ. Other challenges include striving to influence policies. Believe it or not, spending time in DC, not just about regulatory issues from the SEC and otherwise, is important. Spending time thinking about immigration laws is equally important to an organization like PwC as we operate globally and try to access global talent. Making sure that the laws allow for the mobilization of talent around the world is a key challenge that we, as a leadership team, as an organization, need to pay attention to. We need to promote new talent management techniques and models to continually promote, from your eyes, not from ours, innovation, the sense of entrepreneurship, and what it takes in your eyes to be successful, balancing the personal and the professional. And we need to encourage the learning on both, not just in the training rooms, but also on the job, with the experiential learning that ultimately is the key to seeing how to actually lead your way through the many challenges we've had in the past. It's a complex world. PwC lives through it. You will live through it. This organization and school lives through it each and every day. And again, the challenge is not to just deal with the challenges, but rather deal with the opportunities that are sitting in front of us. Which gets you to the third element of change, or forces of change, and that is one of risk management. If you think about risk management in a complex world, traditional risk management has historically thought about risk management from 3 steps. Identifying the threats that are important to an organization, trying to think through how to estimate what those risks really mean to that organization, and then working your way through mitigating those risks, minimizing the negative effects. Again, those techniques, some could argue, are old and outdated. And even the idea of scenario planning, stress testing, and the like cannot be used appropriately unless you really know what's clear that has to be measured. But what happens if you're unable to measure, unable to identify those risks? And in the last few years, you've seen this. The complexity of doing business around the world, interacting with different dependencies, organizations, cultures, backgrounds, and the like, bring a new sense of concern that we cannot predict for. So instead of risk management, we're hearing about a new word in the boardroom, one called resiliency, the ability to bounce back and recover. IBM defines resiliency in a different way. The ability of an organization, its business and operations, to rapidly adapt and respond to internal and external dynamic changes, and to continue operations with limited impact to the business and all stakeholders. Others have made similar analogies to the living world. Companies, they say, need to develop their own immune systems, which allow them to quickly adapt to the unexpectation of risk and mutations of additional risk that we have yet to see. However, if you look back to the rules, one thing that we have in fact looked towards and looked back on is the fact that rules themselves will not help deal with risk management. You can argue that today's rules around the banking industry and the Dodd-Frank bill are dealing with some of the issues of the past. The question on the table is whether or not they're going to deal with the issues of the future as you think about a dynamic, complex, global world that we live in. Organizations need to find new ways, new approaches. One of those ways is to approach it from a totally different angle, which is the people in the organization. A diverse organization with diverse people and backgrounds is your best weapon. Leveraging them not only in terms of developing your strategies, but in the execution of those strategies is key, which when combined with social media, cloud computing, and the challenges of technology, is better in the eyes of the employees than it is in the eyes of the CEO. Those organizations that actually manage successfully, those financial institutions that manage successfully in this financial crisis, deputize their entire organization to help manage risk. Manage risk on the downside and capture risk on the upside. It was the best risk management tool that they had to use. Far better than value at risk, stress testing, scenario planning, and the like. Leveraging the employee base and the talent pool in the 21st century is not just a matter of having the right people, it's also a matter of moving beyond rules and regulations. It is all about corporate culture and changing that to an advantage. An advantage that, in fact, will give you that competitive edge to outperform the competition. So the autocratic, top-down decision-making that has been made in the past perhaps is, again, something that the telescope looks to, appropriately so, but is clearly not what the kaleidoscope is looking towards or looking to be. And in its place needs to be a culture where organizations led by individuals with the right skill sets understand how to, in fact, emphatically engage every person in the organization and every stakeholder around the organization to be successful. Which leads me to the last point, which is around trusting as well as verifying what's going on. Trust is a major factor in terms of every business decision that gets made around the world. Deals, employment contracts, transactions, M&A, and the like. It's the heart of our business and what we do. Many of our clients hire us because they want to provide assurance on what their financial statements say. The reality, that's only half of the battle. How are individuals getting assurance that they're thinking about these issues in the appropriate way? The accountant's role is one that I'm proud of. It's one that will be around for a long period of time, but nonetheless, it goes far beyond just the accountant's role. In the world today, going back to the first theme of the rebalancing, and moving towards a handshake agreement to a digital agreement, and moving towards new rules, regulations, and the like, and moving to organizations that have deputized all their employees, how do you get comfortable that what in fact should be happening is in fact happening? When you look at organizations that have done well in the past, there's two or three I can think of just right off the top of my head where they in fact have spent the time not to get other service providers to check the contracts or assure the financial information. It's actually digging into the details themselves to be comfortable, trusting and verify that the things are happening that need to be happening. And 21st century, 22nd century leadership needs to make sure that's a skill set done in the most effective and efficient way possible. They must lead what I will call the institutional trust that organizations may have and should have as they become successful. When you look at these four areas of change, the great rebalancing, dimension for talent, the concept of risk management moving to resiliency, and finally this concept of trust but verify, you can see in the organizations that have been successful how they're coming to life. Now let's pause for a second and go to the second part of the discussion, which is all about how would you differentiate the companies that have moved from just performing and getting by to those companies that are outperforming. What have those organizations really done in the last 2 years that's different than the others to distance themselves from the competition? And I would tell you there's 5 or 6 things that we see time and time again. First, the organizations have set a strategy. They're sticking to that strategy. They're managing through the crisis that just went through them and any future crisis ahead of them. They're not managing to that crisis. They're focusing that strategy on the ultimate consumer. How can I think through where the ultimate consumer will be? For many years, going back to the concepts of the rebalancing, the U.S. has been that ultimate consumer. It's not the case going forward. And as a result, the organizations that are outperforming are actually thinking about their strategy and executing on a global basis and moving aggressively into the opportunities in China, Brazil, Indonesia, Russia, and the like. The third thing they're doing is continuing to manage their balance sheet And balance sheet is around cash, capital, and people, and deploying it effectively. Many would argue that U.S. corporations actually did a very good job of gaining the efficiencies and effectiveness to deal with the crisis and the Great Recession. I would say that's true. But those organizations that have outperformed and will outperform are now deploying that in different ways. They are, in fact, buying market share around the world to position themselves for recovery. They are, in fact, investing in infrastructure to leverage technology to make better, quicker, faster decisions. They are, in fact, deploying their talent around the world to take advantage of opportunities yet to come. They have, in fact, moved to resiliency as they thought about risk management. I can tell you during the financial crisis, there were 2 CEOs of major financial institutions I met with in 1 week. One struggled, and by the time I got to the second one, he asked the question because he had just met with the CEO of the first one. And he said, "What the heck is going on up there?" He said, "Strike that. Tell me what's going on here." And the conversation I had with him was the fact that he had deputized the entire organization to think about every potential risk and raise it up the food chain to deal with any risk in front of them. He had deputized the organization to think about every opportunity in front of them and make sure the organization figured out ways to capitalize on those opportunities with speed and make the executive decisions to adjust and, using the words I used earlier, create the immune system that's now adaptable to all the things that are in front of them. You look at organizations as well that in fact have figured out where and how to spend their time. With the Great Recession has come great uncertainty. Uncertainty around employment, uncertainty around tax, uncertainty about regulation. You could spend yourself 24/7 trying to solve all those problems and the implications. The organizations that have done well have actually pinpointed what are the 2 or 3 major themes that are most impactful to our strategy, and everything else is the spaghetti dust that gets stuck to the wall, and I'm not going to deal with that, or I'm going to let somebody else deal with that. And they've chosen to use their time effectively in dealing with the interactions with not only the U.S. government, but governments around the world to have the most impact, to bring the influence of change and relevancy to the table. And finally, organizations have leveraged their people in an unbelievable way. Those are the organizations that are doing those things today that in fact are outperforming. You will see in the U.S. over the next couple of years not a significant change in the unemployment figures. You will see uncertainty in terms of the rules and regulations. And even with the election that just happened, regardless of your political affiliation, the reality is there's tremendous laws and regulations to still be made, analysis to be done. I don't know if they'll come to fruition. They're still law. There's still a challenge for them to accomplish that. One could argue that, in fact, they may never come because the funding will get cut off, and they won't have the people to do the analysis. That uncertainty, for those that have thought about this the right way, is tremendous opportunity. Opportunity for them to actually, again, stick to your strategy, deploy your capital well, get better information to get better decisions, follow the ultimate consumer, deputize your people to be building the resiliency in the organization to survive longer term no matter what the threat may be, and ultimately come out more successful than ever before, even with all the uncertainty that's out there. And when you look at our client base, you see that time and time again. Those that are doing it are coming back to these 4 themes, just executing it in different ways. I landed on the last point being around the people within organizations for a reason. And this now comes to you, your personal brand. Anytime I visit a school, and I usually go to 5 or 6 a year, people say, what's it going to take to be successful? And the answer is, it's all about your personal brand. And what are you doing to enhance your personal brand? Your personal brand ends up then driving a corporate brand. That's the message we've given to PwC. Is there's 30,000 people in the US, there's 163,000 people around the world. PwC's brand is not PwC, it's 30,000 people combined. So what do we tell our people in today's day and age around their personal brand? We tell them first and foremost, you got to have an elevator speech. Who are you? What do you do? What do you stand for? How do you add value? When somebody walks into the elevator bank, do you say hello or go quiet? Is that elevator speech ready to go? Because every person you meet is an opportunity or even an interview. You may not know it at that point in time, but it is. And the impact you have in that elevator speech will actually cascade for a long period of time to create additional opportunity for you, should you choose to use it. Second, what's your passion? What do you want to do? What do you love doing? And does it come out time and time again? Does it define you, going back to that elevator speech? And is that known by others so they can remember you? So 1 and 2 go closely hand in hand. Third, how do you build a network? Building a network starts not when you start a job. It's already started, hopefully, by being in this audience. And I told a story earlier today with a group of PwC people that are interviewing with us around the first-year staff accountant many, many years ago that made friends with the person delivering the mail. And over a 25 to 30-year period, that mailman became the CEO. How many of you are even saying hello to the mailman? Because that mailman could be the next client you interact with. It could be the next CEO you might be pitching to. It could be your neighbor. Could be your boyfriend and girlfriend. Who the heck knows? You got to think about your network, creating it, feeding it, flourishing it, keep in contact with it. When I first came into the role as CEO, one of the things we talked about is how do we get more aggressive in trying to grow the business, in addition to delivering quality in everything we do. And I gave a challenge to our 30,000 people, and I said, go figure out the 5 people you haven't talked to in the last year. Pick up the phone and talk to them, because most likely it's somebody that was in your network and needs to be refreshed, and it's somebody that probably is operating somewhere there where PwC can give them an opportunity to think about a piece of advice that causes them to be more successful. The most feedback I got from the 30,000 people in PwC was from the secretaries in terms of who they interacted with. The neighbors, the moms and dads on the soccer field, everybody that they knew that actually was working somewhere, had a personal and professional challenge of where probably somewhere in PwC we had somebody that could help. And the challenge was not for them to deliver it. The challenge for them was to then leverage their internal network at PwC to connect them to the PwC network to create and capitalize on the opportunity. So elevator speech, your passion, your network. Fourth, this concept of technology, which I referenced before, is huge. It's an asset. It's potentially a liability. You guys know what I'm talking about. But the reality is you need to think about how do you leverage technology different than ever before to capitalize on the network, stay in touch with that network and the like. And oh, by the way, when you have that network, use it. You got to use that network not only for whatever challenge, opportunity you have in front of you, but you got to use that network to get the coaching to make you more successful. One of my best network is actually a client. She was actually the COO, then the CIO, and then ultimately the internal auditor of a major institution. And I check in with her literally probably once a month. That's my network. And I check in to say how we doing from a client service perspective. I check in to say how the kid's doing. I check in to say how you doing. What are you thinking about as your next career path? She does the same with me, including saying, hey, Moritz, change the color of your tie, go get a haircut, and everything else. But that kind of coaching is needed each and every day to be successful. So your network is not just about the network and having it when you need it. It's staying close to it and asking for feedback all the time for continuous improvement. And the last thing I will tell you about in terms of a theme is risk-taking. Personal risk-taking, go doing something different above and beyond the norm. I think about when I was asked to go to Japan. I didn't have a passport. I didn't like Japanese food. I didn't speak Japanese. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. But it was, in fact, the best thing I could have ever done. I played at a level higher than the level I had, interacting with CEOs in Japan. I traveled around the world, Korea, going into China at a time that you couldn't do that, Australia, Singapore, whatever the case may be. One of the biggest challenges and best opportunities was not interacting with the Japanese, but how many other expats from France, from Germany, from the UK, from Brazil, I got to know. And how many of them today are now part of my personal network that I connect with each and every day. Some of them in the firm, some of them outside the firm. A risk? Absolutely. A career path change that was not linear, but nonetheless a total change and off kilter in terms of everybody else. And I can't predict for you what your career path should be and will be. And as a result, you got to be comfortable getting off the path and trying things differently. Maybe even volunteering to do so, to challenge yourself, distinguish yourself, differentiate yourself. So in fact, you ultimately can get more experiences that make you better and well-rounded, and ultimately you become part of that immune system, that resiliency, that deputized person in an organization that I talked about before. As you think about the 4 elements of change, the rebalancing that's happening globally and how the world economy is going to be over the next decade, 2 or 3, huge systematic change that has an impact on leadership, has an impact on risk management, impact in terms of trusting and verifying and understanding how to have that intellectual curiosity to do all that you need to do. And you're already starting to see organizations differentiate themselves for those that manage that well. And you're reading about them in the newspapers. You're seeing them do acquisitions today. You're seeing them make the investments and spend the time in those emerging countries, in addition to laying the foundations of seed for success here in the States. But they're leading the people change from the front and being part of it. And they're asking every employee in their organization to step up and actually be part of that change strategically, with its execution, and ultimately helping define the brand of the organization. I hope in going through some of this conversation, it didn't give you something just to think about, but maybe gave you something more importantly to ask about and further have that intellectual curiosity. Because as I said to the first group I met with today, the talent pool today is scarce. Scarcer than people believe. The talent opportunity for you in demonstrating how you're different is just enormous. In every organization I interact with, the #1 challenge they say is, do I have the right people? Do I have enough people? Have I developed the people? Have I deployed the people? That's the challenge for them, and that's the opportunity for you. So with that as a backdrop, Jim, let me open up for questions so we can do a little bit of Q&A. So who wants to open up and start? And I'll take a swig of water while we keep my voice going here. Somebody's got to start and be bold. Are you allowed to start?
Yeah.
Yep.
How do you think about differentiating yourself from your very respectable?
So the question was, for those that didn't hear it, you got 3 major competitors in our space. How do you differentiate yourself, and how do you go about trying to do that? It comes back down to the people in our organization and having a level of consistency of the skill sets that our people in our organization have. That is the Holy Grail. So let me tell you a little bit more specifically what I mean by that. If you look at us as an organization, and let's just pick on for a second having 3 different audit clients, of which on the board of all 3 is 1 board member. What it's all about is the consistency by which PwC brings excellent quality service across all 3. Now, if that board member, when asked the question, says, you're doing a great job at client A, you're doing an average job on client B, and you're doing a lousy job on client C, what that then tells us and tells him is, do you have enough of the right people across all 3? How do I get the consistency across all three, which comes back to what am I actually baking into the training, the culture, and the like of a PwC organization and the professionals that are there? And I said this earlier today. Our challenge with our people is to raise their respective games and raise them such that you're successful inside the firm or raise them such that you're successful outside the firm. So the differentiation comes from the firm that can get to that Holy Grail the quickest, the fastest, and the most consistently will actually differentiate. It only comes true when you actually trust and verify, using those same words. And the group that I met with this morning, or rather this afternoon, was talking about the recruiting process. Every firm will say the same thing. It's no different when I'm pitching for those three clients. Every client pitch will say the same thing. The challenge is how do you actually have your existing clients tell the story for you as opposed to you having to tell the story for you. Just like in the recruiting process, I can tell you anything I want. What your challenge is to go talk to the people at those organizations and say, is this BS or is this real and how is it different? That's the differentiation that has to happen. And now as a leader, coming back to now the speech, I've got to make sure the culture, the consistency, and all of the supporting and enabling mechanisms helps make that come to life. So that's how we actually differentiate. Others? I get a self-correction every day. Yeah, there's a bunch of different examples I can give you. Let me start off with one in particular. When I first got into the role 15 months ago, I made a big push for focusing on two things, the brand of PwC and how everybody's personal brand sort of influences that, and growing our business significantly. What I didn't do was talk enough about our people explicitly, because people was part of every single one of those things. So again, in the self-correction mode, missed the boat. Another example, you're challenged every single day by the amount of time that you can spend and how is it you best prioritize highest and best use. One of the things I thought about coming in was that for the first year, I didn't want to go on any non-for-profit boards or go on to any kind of board of directors outside of PwC. I thought it was best to sort of wait, figure it out later on. But the other thing, too, I didn't do as much is I was always focused on the marketplace, and I didn't spend enough time in DC. So again, another concept, as I think about the challenges that the profession will have going forward, that's why in the last 6 months I probably spent more time in DC to try to influence not just the PCOB and the SEC, but congressmen and women, as well as senators and Treasury and the like around what we're seeing. And I'll give you a good example. The very first meeting I had with Mary Shapiro, she came at me with a question, which is, okay, what do you think of IFRS? So I gave her my point of view. It was actually different than the competition. So she was intrigued by that. We talked about it for a while. And I said, Mary, I'm surprised we're not talking about hedge funds, private equity, executive compensation, the fluctuations in the capital markets, the flash crash, and everything else. And she looked at me and said, I wouldn't have even thought to ask you that stuff. And what I said to Mary was, Mary, do you realize how many clients we're in front of talking about this stuff each and every day? That we're much broader than just, IFRS and where's it going, or fair value and the accounting for that stuff. The points of view, actually, that we can bring to bear are much different. Go to a senator. How many conversations I had with a senator that started off with an economy that actually got to the rules and regulations around banks, which got to around accounting for bank loans, fair value and everything else, that they would blame on the quote-unquote economy. So that's where, again, another self-correction, a little bit more conscious balancing of the time, where to spend it, how to spend it, would be the examples I'd point to. Does that help? Yeah. So, others? I'll answer anything and everything, so fire away, guys. Trust me. And from the group from this morning, I hope you guys saw that.
You mentioned you visit 5 to 6 universities. Obviously, have a lot more touch points beyond that while you're recruiting efforts. What could educational institutions do better? What specifically should we change as we educate the
Yeah. Here's where I would go to, and this is hard to do when you think about the curriculum, the amount of hours people have, et cetera. And I applaud you guys for doing these kind of series, but I will tell you, you're a step ahead of a lot of other places I go to. And you're ahead of them in a couple of ways. One, the way you do your liberal arts into the MBA program gives a hell of a lot more broader experience learning around some of the skill sets that are more in the formal speech I gave and what people are looking for in addition to the technical stuff. That's actually a benefit when you think about the vast skill set and perspective that people bring to bear as opposed to the traditional technical accountant or technical tax person. So that would be issue number one. Issue number two is actually taking the theoretical and academical into the practical. And I know, we as a profession need to do more here in giving you real-life examples of what decisions we made, how did we influence it, how do we do our job each and every day. Because I go back to when I was first recruited. I shared the story before. I came into my first month of training. I had no clue as to what to do. We did the role-playing and stuff like that. And the person next to me who knew it all was this woman, Patty Lettieri. And I said to Patty, I shared the story before, Patty, how do you know all this stuff? And she goes, well, it's from the internship. And I didn't have the internship. And it was all from the on-the-job training of the practical realities of what we do each and every day that uses the foundation of what you learn in college and universities and then says, how do you really apply them in real life? And the many, many judgment calls that have to be brought to bear. And again, I think you guys, from what I understand here, from the team that we have that's been spending a lot of time with you, you guys seem to be better than most in that regard, but we don't have a consistency across the entire organizational construct of universities and colleges around the country to get people better prepared for that stuff. One last thing, which is, this is one where I got to figure out how to collectively bring groups together. One of the things that we as a firm have thought about is we need to actually play that role of convener. When you look at accounting standards as a good example, I can say what I think is the right answer or what should be the trend of where we go to. I will tell you, because of Sarbanes-Oxley and some of the history, the profession will be viewed as self-serving. We took a really hard point of view against the FASB around fair value. And we actually took a point of view, a thought leadership piece about slowing down the number of accounting standards that were coming out. And Bob Hers, who was at the time the FASB head, called me up and wanted to have lunch, and he wanted to yell at us because he thought we were listening to our clients too much. Now, Bob's a former partner of ours. But he wanted to yell because he wasn't liking the answers of what we were saying. And I said, Bob, you're going to this point of saying that investors want more and more and more information. And I'm talking to investors, and I don't hear it. And I'm not hearing it the same way you are. And every CFO I go speak at, GE, IBM, Procter & Gamble, Pfizer, Merck, whatever the case may be, that's not what they're hearing. So I said, now, I can say that, but someone will say you're self-serving and listening too much to your client, which is exactly what Bob said to me. The challenge is now, how do I convene the profession, the standard setters, CFOs, and institutional investors to say, what is it we really want going forward? And I tell you that story because that's the example of convening groups as opposed to leading from the front. One of the challenges we have as a profession is having enough faculty prepared to teach and having enough students to be interested. And that goes back to the high school. So how do we think about the combination of getting into high schools to talking about what this profession is really all about as opposed to just everybody's perception that you do tax returns? And I know that's what my mom still thinks I do. So, but that's the thing we got to think about collectively as a group of, again, faculty, the professors, and the like. So, others. I think probably one of the biggest things that we'll need to deal with looking ahead is this issue of the global rebalancing. Each of the firms is really a series of partnerships around the world. And the challenge is, how do you actually do global audits, global projects, tax projects, and the like with one single organization? And the challenge is the legal liability that actually forces you not to go down that path. And again, we got a legal issue around here in the States in particular. And what I've said to people is, we'll relook at our organizational construct. What I need to actually do more of is say to people, I don't want liability reform. And this is where, again, I differ from my competitors. I actually want more respect of the professional judgments that we make, as opposed to the textbook answers by which we make them. And I would hope that the legal system could actually respect those professional judgments the right way. So let me give you a very specific example. I just met with the PCOB, which is the regulatory agency that oversees the profession. And they're in the process of identifying who the next chair of that organization is. And we went to the PCOB board about 3 months ago, and one of the board members says, what's your view on regulation and the regulator relationship that you should have with us? I said, listen, I actually applaud having a PCOB. It's very important in the role that you play, trusting and verifying what we're doing and doing the right thing. I said, I also respect the points of view that you're bringing. And he jumped in and he says, well, let me ask a question. Why is it you disagree so much with what you say versus what we say? And what I said to him was, listen, our people, 30,000 people, make judgment calls each and every day. Each and every day that you don't see. We influence behavior. We make people book things that never get disclosed as an individual item that would have gone bad before it goes out in the public press. And what I'm looking for is you to respect the process, that if our people plan accordingly, if our people execute accordingly, if they consult with others to come to the right answer, and if they discuss those issues with management, then you should respect what they did, as opposed to threaten, going to jail. Because if you do that, that'll actually have a total disheartening effect on the profession and anybody wanting to be here. I'm willing to take the liability risk when we screw up. But let's respect the judgment calls that we're making in each and every client situation. And that's, I think, our challenge going forward as I look at the world in China, in India, et cetera, in terms of the respect for the profession. So, one more question up on top. Yep. Mm-hmm. I'd say in general, I don't have any specific advice because it is so dependent on the facts and circumstances of the individual. I can give you the general advice and say, listen, when I think about career paths and the like, what you want to do is land in an organization that's going to get you the most experience and the most exposure to give you multiple options. And here's the way I think about it, just so you have a sense. When I think about our people in PwC, they may be doing job A today. What I want to make sure they think about is what's job B, and by doing job B, is it going to create 4 different opportunities after that? And this way, using an option theory, they can go this way, they can go this way, or that way. So the challenge as you think around your career paths is not this linear straight across or this straight up. It's how am I going to zigzag through all those, and every job opportunity I have should hopefully create exponential opportunities and multiple directions to go next. So when you think about your interaction with the interviews and the like that you have, what you want to be thinking about is not only landing that first job, but how is it you're going to build the resume, how is you going to get the experience, how is you going to get the exposure to see all those other opportunities at the other end, either in that organization or otherwise, and then thinking about what are the multiple steps to go capture it. So I wouldn't say I don't have a specific on which career path to take, but rather how to think about the decisions you make when you're going through the interview process and the job search process going forward. And again, you're back to what organizations can best care for you in terms of care and feeding, and go, in fact, create the opportunities for experience, exposure, and potential for advancement, career progression, personal satisfaction, job satisfaction, and the like. So that's where I would go with that. Okay? I think I'm set. Yeah. Thanks.
Well, it's my pleasure to do a couple of things. The first is on behalf of UNC Kenan-Flagler to extend a warm vote of thanks to you, Bob, for coming and talking in a very interesting way about a lot of interesting topics to us. So please, if you'll join me in a round of applause. Thank you. The other thing is we always like to give our guests here a gift, and the gift that Bob requested was red wine. We thought about light blue wine, but that probably would have been a little strange. So please accept this token of our appreciation for coming and talking with us. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it. the red wine is appropriate. I told this story earlier that I'll share with the rest of you. How did I ever get started in this profession? And there were two monumental ways I got started. First and foremost, I had no idea what I wanted to do in high school, coming back to that theme I left you with. And it was only when I read in the New York Times article that partners made $90,000 that I thought about actually joining this. So that's really what got me there. And the second thing was actually, and I hate to say it this way because I don't want to be influencing and inducing, but the choice I made actually when joining PwC was made on spring break. And it was a choice between IBM, where my father worked and I had an internship, versus the Big 8. And I interviewed at all the firms. And again, I went back to who I thought was best and would give me the best potential. And candidly, the gut check, because of the best people I interacted with, and I sort of felt it in my stomach, it was the place to go. There was probably numerous beers, because we were able to drink back then and be legal. But nonetheless, my friends helped me quite a bit in terms of the choice. So thanks for the alcohol in terms of what we're doing today. And thanks for the time today. I'll be sticking around. So by all means, like I said earlier, I'll take every and any question you guys have while I'm sticking around. So take advantage of that. And with the other PwC people that are here as well. So good luck with everything, and thanks again for the hospitality. Thanks.